In this tutorial, we'll look at how to acquire and map U.S. Census data, specifically American Community Survey or ACS data in ArcMap 10.3. Because we're going to map the data, we're going to need geospatial layer files. The Census provides these, and you can find them from the main web page under Geography, Maps and Data. In the lower right, we want Tiger products, and we're going to take the newest available Tiger line shapefiles. Scroll down on the page, and under Download, choose the web interface. We want to pick the most up-to-date data, 2015 in this case, and for this tutorial we're going to be looking at census tracts. These are the enumeration units or the level of geography that we're interested in analyzing. Click on Submit, choose the state of interest. In this case we're looking at Massachusetts, and then download the data. I'm going to save it into a clean directory. Once that data has been downloaded, you need to unzip it into that directory. In this case, I'm using my unzipping utility, but any will work, to extract the data into the directory. When you do that, you should see a variety of files, all of them pertaining to that particular layer. In ArcMap, you can make a connection to that folder and go ahead and add that data. When it comes in initially, if you're familiar with your geography, you might notice that it looks a little distorted. And that's because the data that comes from the census is unprojected data. If you look at the source and the properties for that layer, you'll notice that it's set to GCS North America 1983, which is Geographic Coordinate System, or latitude and longitude, which is fine in general, but if you're going to do any kind of measurements for distance or area, it's better to work with a projected coordinate system that's been tailored to your area. In this case, I'm going to change the coordinate system of the data frame, rather than the layer itself, to Massachusetts State Plane. So I'm going to the properties for the data frame, and then looking under the Coordinate System tab, Projected Coordinate Systems, in this case State Plane. I'm going to use NAD 1983 meters, and looking for Massachusetts mainland 2001. And it will change the apparent shape of the geography, but more importantly, it's just simply a better projection because it reduces distortion. You'll also notice too, if you're familiar with geography, that you may have census tract boundaries that extend out into the water, which may be a little distracting, although it's really not relevant to the analysis. In any case, if it bothers you, you can remove it, at least visually, by going to the properties for the layer itself and using the definition query to eliminate those. So I'm going to build a query that essentially says, just show me the census tracts in which there is some land. Here, area land is greater than 0. And when I apply that, you'll see that some of the polygons disappear. They're not actually gone, it's just for visual purposes. In any case, what we have now is just the geography or spatial layer for census tracts in Massachusetts. But if we look at the attributes for this layer, we'll notice as we scroll through that there are no demographic attributes in this layer. There are simply attributes for the geography, which is what we need, but it's not enough. One thing to pay attention to, though, is this GeoID column. That column will become important because it's going to be the basis for joins between demographic data and this spatial layer. So we want to know the characteristics of this layer because we need to edit the other data to match it. When you right-click on that layer, you'll notice that the statistics will be grayed out, which indicates that the data is actually text or string rather than numbers. Even though all the digits appear to be numbers, it's formatted as a text or string, and that will be important in order to, again, join data to it. In any case, we have half the data we need. The other half is going to have to come from the demographics. So we're going to go back to the Census website, going to the main page again. In order to acquire demographic data, specifically ACS data, we're going to click on Data, Data Tools and Apps, and then we want American FactFinder in this case. American FactFinder is a general tool that lets us select the demographic data that we want. Under Download Center, we'll start the guidance process to go through a wizard that will select the data we want. leave the default for I know the dataset or table I want to download and click Next. Then we choose a program that we want, and the Census has various types of programs of data collection. We're interested specifically in the first one, American Community Survey. And in this case, we're going to be choosing the 2014 ACS 5-year estimates. We're using 5-year estimates because that's all that's available at the geography, the census tracts that we're using. If we were working with cities or larger geographies, we could use a 1 year, but that's not what we're doing right now. So with the proper year and time span selected, we click Add to Your Selections. It appears over on the right-hand side. Then we click Next. Now we pick the geography that we want. In this case, we're working with census tracts. Choose the state. We can choose a county, but in this case, I want all the census tracts in Massachusetts. So I'm going to skip down to the last window there and choose all census tracts within Massachusetts. And then click on Add to Your Selections, and you should see that on the right-hand side. Then click Next again. Finally, we have a list of tables that are available to us at this geography for this program data set. So for this tutorial, what we're interested in are two variables. We want to know the percentage of Hispanics or number of Hispanics per census tract in Massachusetts, and we want to know the owner occupancy rate for housing units in the same census tracts. So the first variable we want is Hispanic. So I'm going to type in Hispanic in the search bar, and it'll offer me several options that include that word. The last one is the one that I want, Hispanic or Latino by origin. So when I click on that and choose Go, it isolates just that table. When you're looking at tables and trying to decide, the easy way to do it is to click on the little I button. It'll show you how that table is formatted and laid out so you can see what data is going to come with it. In this case, it's pretty straightforward. I have two categories, not Hispanic or Latino, and Hispanic or Latino, and that's exactly what I want. So I'm going to check off that table so I can download it. Now I'm going to remove the selection over here on the right-hand side so it shows me all the tables again. The selection will stay though, so I won't lose it. And I'll type in tenure, and tenure is what I want in this case. Click Go again. It isolates that table. Take a look at it to see what it contains. And sure enough, very simply, either owner-occupied housing units or renter-occupied, and that's exactly what I need. So I'll close that, select that table, and now if I click Next, it'll show me the two tables that I've selected, tenure and Hispanic or Latino by origin. And it offers to also include descriptive data element names in the tables. You will need to remove these before it goes into Arc, but we'll actually walk through that process. So I'll leave those in for the moment because they do offer a little bit of guidance. Click OK, and your download will be processed. Once it's available, click on Download, and you'll be offered a zip file to download. All files that you download from American FactFinder this way are always going to have the same name, so if you're downloading multiple files, make sure that you rename them so you don't overwrite your work. So I'm going to say OK to save the file into the same directory with all my other data. It should be a fairly small file, so it won't take long to download. Once it's in there, we can go into that directory, and just like we did with previous files, we're going to unzip it before we can access it. So I'm going to right-click on that file and choose the option to extract the files. In this case, I've extracted the files to a new folder that's named given the same name as the zipped file, the AFF download. When you look in that folder, you're going to notice two sets of files. One set belongs to the Hispanic or Latino origin table, and one belongs to the tenure table. So the relevant data that we want is actually contained in these files. They all are CSV, or comma separated values files, which indicates that they are essentially text files in which the columns are separated by commas. It's a particularly robust way of translating tabular data that most programs can interpret. And in fact, in this case, you will notice that the little Excel icon appears right next to this file because I have Microsoft Excel installed on this computer. Now that just means that Excel knows how to open that table. It doesn't necessarily mean it's an Excel file, but more importantly actually, you don't want to open it this way. In fact, if you double clicked on it, Excel would open it, but it's going to cause formatting problems. So what's actually a safer way to do is to go and open up Excel separately first, and then we're going to import the data. That way we can control how it reads the columns, and I'll explain what that means as we get going. So I'll click on the Data tab at the top, and then choose From Text. Navigate into the AFF download folder where I have my data. We'll start with the Hispanic data, and I'll choose the file that contains the data and choose Import. Now it asks you how is this table set up. So it defaults to fixed width, but in fact this is a delimited file. Click Next, and it's delimited using commas. So I'm going to uncheck Tab and select comma. And the minute I do, you can see already that it breaks up the columns in a logical way that makes sense according to the data. Click Next. Now you have the option of specifying the format of the data. And this is particularly important because this is something that Excel will not get right frequently, and even Arc will mess it up, so you have the chance to control that. The first two columns are indeed text only, so I'm going to select each one in turn and choose text. And these columns, in particular GeoID2, is really important because we're going to be using that to join our data. So once that's selected, I'll click Finish. It'll prompt me to ask where you want the data to go. That's fine by default. It'll throw it into the sheet that I'm working in. And now you can see the columns of data, and you can scroll along. Now it's important to keep in mind too that the data we're looking at, the column names are really important from ARC's perspective. So ArcGIS and ArcMap will not like column names that have special characters in them, like the periods or spaces. And this second row is going to have to go too, because Arc will not be able to read that. But we'll use that second row for the moment to guide ourselves. So first let me get rid of those periods, because Arc won't like that. Oops. Here, this is an opportunity to clean up the labels on the columns and also to indicate what we have. This column, the estimate or total, contains information about the total number of people in each census tract. It's kind of what we call a universe in the data against which all the other columns or tabulations are compared. So I'm going to rename this column to Pop Total so I know what it is, because eventually I'm going to get rid of the second row. I have to. The margin of error we're going to ignore for the moment, but just suffice it to say that because the ACS data is drawn from statistical samples across the U.S., this essentially is an estimate of how off the data might be, and so it's a good way of assessing the reliability of the data you have, but it's a little beyond the scope of this particular tutorial. So we're going to actually get rid of this column in a second. So the other data that we're interested in is one that has information about the total number of Hispanics or Latinos, and that's this column right here. So I'm going to rename it to Hispanics. Okay. And I'm going to eliminate the columns that I don't need. So I'm going to highlight these columns right here and delete them. Same thing with this last margin of error column, because these are the only two bits of data that I want. And I'm going to add a column with the percentage of Hispanics, because that's really what I'm going to be using to analyze later. So starting in that column where the data is, I'm going to put in a formula to calculate the percentage Hispanics in this data. So I'm taking the number of Hispanics divided by the total population and multiplying it by 100 to turn it into a percentage. And I'm going to copy that formula and paste it in all the other cells, and it's automatically calculated, which is very nice for me. Now lastly, I'm going to get rid of this row. Okay. And now the data has been nicely formatted. The columns have been renamed. I only have the data that I'm interested in. So now I'm going to save this workbook as an Excel workbook. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, put it into the same folder where I have all the other data of interest. And I call this Hispanic so I don't get it confused. Okay. And that data can now be brought into Arc. And the way that we're going to do that, Arc doesn't really talk well with Excel, especially the newer versions of Excel. I'm using 2010 in this case. So we're going to use a tool that's access to the Arc toolbox. And in the Arc toolbox, when that window opens, we're going to be looking under Conversion Tools, and you'll see there's an option for Excel. And specifically, we want to go Excel to Table. So I'll double click on that to start the tool. Pick the input Excel file, in this case Hispanics. Okay. It's going to create an output table, and I don't want to lose track of where that is, so I'm going to change the destination for that option. So I'm going to put it back in here and call it Hispanics. Again, it'll have a different extension, so it won't overwrite anything. It asks me too which sheet contains the data, so you might have a workbook with multiple sheets, but in this case we worked only in the first worksheet, so that's okay. So then I'll choose OK, and the tool will run. You can see it in the lower right there. And as soon as it's completed, a little message will pop up letting you know whether or not it worked successfully, and you got a little green check mark, so it did. And it's added automatically to the table of contents. So I want to right-click on that table and open it to check my data. And I'm particularly interested in making sure that the data that I wanted is brought over. So I see that the numbers of the total population, Hispanics, and percentages have been brought over. I notice too that these are brought over as numbers. This is particularly important so that they're the right format. And I can tell automatically too, simply because anything that's right justified means that it's a number format. In contrast, text are going to be left justified. So you can see that too, and the statistics are of course grayed out there. But the most crucial one of all is this one right here. And I see that statistics is grayed out, which is a good sign because that means that this has been brought over properly as a text file, and this can be joined to our geography layer shapefile. So now that I have my data in here, now I can actually execute a join. So I'm going to right click on my geography layer, and I'm going to go to Joins and Relates, Join, and it's going to ask me what do I want to base the join on. In this case it's the GeoID column, and within the Hispanics column, or table rather, we're going to pick GeoID 2, and that will be the column that contains matching unique IDs that are in the proper format. In fact, if it wasn't in the proper format, it wouldn't even be offered as an option. You'll notice that there are no other columns offered because it won't try to join two numbers. You have the option to keep all records or keep only the matching records. I always choose the second because in that case, if anything doesn't match, it'll actually disappear from the map and it'll tell you right away. Of course, you can always validate the join to make sure that it works, and it'll ask you if you want yep, everything matched. Okay, saw a warning there. Okay, so then if you don't see anything red telling you it won't match, you can hit OK. And the join will happen, and if nothing disappears, that's a good thing. Nothing happened. If you right-click now and open the attribute table for your layer and scroll to the right, you should see that there's all kinds of data now attached to this file. So the join was successful, and in fact you could straight away start mapping this data. However, it's know that the join that you execute this way is a temporary join. It's ephemeral. It only exists within the map document. If you were to close the map document without saving, you'd lose a join. More importantly, if you tried to transport this particular file, you wouldn't carry the join data over with it. So the only way to make that join data permanent is by exporting it to a copy. So I'm going to right click on that layer, go to Data, Export Data, choose what I'm going to export. So I want all the features, and in this case I'm going to choose, for the coordinate system, I'm going to choose a data frame. As you recall from earlier, I changed the coordinate system of the data frame to be Massachusetts State Plane, which is a better projection for this kind of data. So this will automatically convert the new layer to that. And I'll specify the output location. So in this case, I'm going to call this layer ACS 14 Hispanic. Save that, hit OK. It'll prompt if you want to add the layer, and of course you can. And there will be no obvious distinction between these two layers. They seem to be identical, but the difference is that this layer now has permanent attributes related to these fields that we added, and now we can begin to work with our data. And the most obvious thing that we'd like to do, of course, is to map it. So now we can go into the properties for this layer, go to symbology, In this case, I'm interested in the percent Hispanic, so I'll go to quantity since we're working with a number, choose percent Hispanic, choose, because I'm using one number line, I'm going to choose a single hue or color to look at the data. And now we see the distribution of percentage Hispanic by census tract in Massachusetts.